We all work for missions, and missions expect a certain integrity. We as a society have become very reliant on West Coast, Silicon Valley solutions for every aspect of our life.
I would love open source 2.0 to become a term next year.
So I do think 2026 is going to be the year of the fabrics, the data clouds, the bigger data solution. Grant yourself some space for some left field thinking, because is it so left field? Just go out and do. It's amazing what you can learn.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of Virtue and Virtuosity, and a special Christmas episode at that. I'm Stuart McSkimming, and what you just heard there was some clips from the upcoming podcast that we have all around what's happened in 2025, what we think is going to happen in 2026, and what you need to do to prepare for it. And I'm lucky enough to be joined for today's podcast by Kev Antao. Kev, do you want to do a bit of an introduction to yourself?
Yeah, sure. Hi, Stuart. Hi, everyone who's listening. My name is Kevin Antao. I am a charity technology consultant across several different charities. I'm also a trustee at a small charity, and I'm spending a lot of time with executives reflecting on what happened in 2025 and actually what the future holds, 2026, but often to 2030. So really looking forward to discussing those points here with yourself, Stuart, and the wider community.
Fantastic, Kev. And we even got a little bit of a sneak preview there of what's coming up. So yes, this is a three-parter. We split this into three parts, and the first part is going to be today, where we're looking back on what we've seen are the trends of 2025. And then coming up a couple of days later, we're going to put out an episode which is all about what we expect to happen in 2026, which is going to be a bit of a risky one, I think. And then finally, the final part is going to be all around what you need to do to prepare for this if you're a CEO or if you're in the leadership team in a charity. So I'm really hopeful this is going to be really exciting. And this really came out of a bit of a conversation. Kevin and I work with a lot of charities. We're both involved in consultancy, and we've been doing a lot of work in the last few weeks, talking to different organizations and understanding what they've done and what they're preparing for. We're both also heavily involved in the Charity IT Leaders Network. And we've also been doing a lot of discussions. We've been talking about what's happened this year, and it's been a really, really, really busy year. There's been a huge lot of stuff that's gone on. And alongside this, I've spoken to a lot of people on this podcast, heard a lot of things that are going on. All of these things came together in a bit of conversation. And Kevin and I were just having a catch up over a cup of coffee, and we said this would make a really good podcast to really understand where we got to at the end of this year, to reflect, and where we think we're going with all of this. So, as I said, a lot of things to reflect on here. We've also, over the last few weeks, been chatting to a few of our CIO, CTO, CEO friends, and a lot of the opinion and things that we say in here is reflected from some of those conversations. So it's not all entirely our thoughts. I really hope you enjoy what we talk about here. So going into this now, without any further ado, let's have a little bit of a think about what's gone on in 2025 and what have we seen. And I'm just going to start off with one thing that I've spotted around AI, because I've done quite a bit of work around AI. And I think if I look back on my notes and where I was at last year, there were a lot of charities who are trying to get their heads around what actually AI was. They were talking about how can we explain it more to our staff? How can we launch it within our organizations? How can the leadership teams get more information on it? And we were even having conversations, just really basic things where is this AI? Is this generative AI? What does it all mean? How are things looking? Now, that was all a year ago. What I've really seen now is that there's been a bit of a shift. When I say there's been a bit of a shift, I mean there's been a bit of shift in how we're adopting it. Obviously, in terms of how it's developing, there's been an absolutely massive shift going on. But in terms of the adoption within charities, there has been that bit of a shift where we've got these case studies, we've seen what can happen. And there's various different organizations out there who are really pushing ahead. Some people we've had on this podcast in the past have really now started to use AI in earnest. And so I'm seeing that there's a lot of things now that we're moving on to, and we're focusing on things now like governance and ethics and roles, how it's being used. We've got some organizations doing things with agents and experimenting there. So that's my intro there. Kevin, I'm curious, what have you seen? Have you seen anything like that in your experience?
Yeah, 100%. It's been a little bit of a roller coaster in terms of AI. And I always talk about a range of between digital hallucination and digital skepticism. And you've got a lot of people who are sort of advocating the capabilities and running away and running with lots of experiments and really hunting hard for those use cases that are going to give them real value. And then another end of the spectrum, which are really nervous about this capability. There is a real need for upskilling. There is a real need for just actually having the tools and capability and the access to this. But probably the biggest threat is just capacity, having the time and space to engage on this. So it's a real range of thoughts and experiences around that. So yeah, incredible year from a technology perspective and from AI.
And something else I saw is I asked a question of a group of charities the other day, all around policies, and we had about 45 charities in the room, and it was about how many of you have got AI policies, or how many of you have embedded AI within other policies. And we got to somewhere around 85% of the group had some sort of policy. There was still a small group who actually didn't have any policies, but the majority had an AI policy on their own, and there was then a small subset, about 10-15%, who had AI embedded into other policies. But one of the things that I've spotted this year is that there's been a very rapid rollout of AI policies, and I'm not prepared to say how many organizations I know where you've had someone in the organization typing into ChatGPT or Copilot, "Can you give me a template for an AI policy?" I'm sure that's one of the most frequent questions asked of it. But nevertheless, I think it's really good that we've got that in place, because we know that the free versions of ChatGPT, Copilot, Copilot less of an issue, but the free versions of some of the AI tools are being used quite widely within charities on an individual basis, and trying to have some sort of governance and policy around that, I think is probably really important.
Yeah, and on a personal note, there actually just to add to this, I found myself writing AI policies over the course of this year, and I was actually looking at policies that were written in 2024 and actually how out of date they were, particularly around areas around agentic AI. So there really is a lesson here around you're going to have to refresh these. Usually we have this kind of policy cycle where we might be refreshing things like, I don't know, every couple of years or when the next time when we look at it. Sadly, almost with AI policy, it's almost like we have to refresh it every week. It's quite a demand. So yeah, really interesting reflection there as well, Stuart.
Maybe people need to be writing agents to go around refreshing their AI policy on a weekly basis. That would be fantastic. Um, so, um, so, uh, so that there was a couple of trends all around AI we've seen this year. Kevin, do you have any other big things that you have seen in the last 12 months?
Yeah, I think it's worth reflecting on just the wider charity sector here and away from technology. I mean, I think this year has been a really tough year. And I know we say that a lot of the times in the charity sector, and we're always kind of conscious that people are working in incredible ways. But, there was some research published which talked about two-thirds of UK charities, performing some kind of financial recalibration exercise or consultation processes or axing staff. And that's quite a high percentage. And particularly in the last 6 months, we've seen a lot of talent out on the market. I think there's some other research that's talking about 50% of UK charities are almost experiencing a 10 to 50% income drop as well, with the cost of living crisis and other elements biting. So that contextually has really affected, I would say, confidence across the sector in many ways. And I think that perhaps as we think forward to 2026, there's just going to have to be a moment of stability, a little bit of, wow, we've made all these changes. How do we now cope and operate with the new cohorts within these organizations? So, yeah, it's been a tough ride, actually. I think we should probably acknowledge that as well.
And Do we think that this has been the emergency brake, or has this been more gradual? The reason I'm asking this is I've often been in conversations where we've been looking at income in a charity, and then we've realised that things are not going so great at the moment, but we know in about 3 years' time there's going to be a problem. So let's restructure ourselves now. Let's try and get ourselves fit for 3 years from now. We know we've got the reserves and the income isn't dropping that dramatically, but our projections are not looking good. I think in that scenario, the organizations have the luxury that they can make some cuts. They can then set aside some money to reinvest to actually make their organization better and match fit and try and do a bit of right sizing. But in the emergency brake situation, what you end up with is a bit of a chaotic mess of people leaving, teams feeling that they've got all sorts of gaps, not really understanding how they're going to actually work better in the future and work in this new environment. And that one's a lot more dangerous. I don't know if you've got any thoughts on which one of those we've seen this year.
Yeah, and I'm going to show my age here and talk about it as a Highlander moment. Referring to the great series of Highlander films that there can only be one, and I see it as there can only really be one way. I think what you've got is a classic coming together of multiple driving factors. Yes, we've talked a little bit about the rapid technological evolution and changes, particularly around AI and what that means. But I think there's also been long-term shifts, particularly in fundraising. A lot of the charities, the reliance on sort of single grants or single kind of grant management, or the reliance on a particular cohort within their demographic communities, particularly those that relied on, I don't know, legacies and older generations to fund the charity. There was a shift that was always occurring where, the money wielding power was shifting across to different demographics, Gen Z or millennials and others. And actually, was the charity offer appealing to those demographics? That's also been a question. And then, we can't ignore the fact of the macroeconomic picture and the cost of living crisis and other elements. And then, so when you add all these shifts together, it forces this Highlander moment of there can only be one, I guess, and one way. And that's probably forced numerous organizations to have to take action when maybe they've been putting it off for several years. Or maybe, look, they've got to do it in order to be, as you say, fit for getting ready for 2030 and what that might mean. So I see it as 2025 as a year of that culmination of it all coming together.
So far we've covered some interesting progressions that we've seen in the last year on AI and how it's used within the charity sector. But we've also seen a real squeeze on finances, but also that's resulted in a lot of charities having to shrink their teams. And we both work in the world of digital and technology, and we know so many of the teams across the charity sector, and we've seen so many of people we worked with. We've seen them going through restructuring processes and things like that, which is very, very difficult. And we know that when those things happen, it takes a hit on productivity. It means all the projects which you've got in flight all suddenly grind to a halt. You have to deal with remotivating a team, trying to get them back and energized again when they've just been through a difficult time. And we know that there's that going on. What about other things in terms of either broader things going on with regulation or data or anything we've seen around the big technologies that we've used in the past? Have we seen any changes there?
Yeah, and I think that the kind of regulatory compliance, this area, AI has obviously been something that people have been wrestling with. I suppose changes that we've seen this year, if I think about also cybersecurity as well, we've seen the UK sort of cyber resilience bill. We've seen an increasing the charity governance codes that exist now in cybersecurity, where instead of these being almost like voluntary frameworks for organizations to take on board, they're shifting more into statute, and really the larger organizations are really treating this much more seriously. It's been quite an incredible year. I know I spoke about this in another podcast. In terms of those cybersecurity events, we only have to think about Co-op, Harrods, Jaguar Land Rover, and other examples of events that have been Marks and Spencer's, sorry, I forgot as well, where these events have been highly, highly impactful to shareholder wealth and other aspects. So I think, that agenda is never going away. I think in the charity sector, it's been really interesting about people getting ready for rules around soft opt-in and the opportunities that that might bring for us. I think that there's other things on the horizon around legislation for AI. So the landscape is still a lot of work to do. I'm speaking to a data protection officer whose list for next year is extraordinarily long. I think this agenda is just huge, and the shifts we've seen this year have been enormous, and more so next year as well.
I think that point about the agenda being huge, I think is really worth thinking of and pausing on, because just on the cybersecurity point alone, you mentioned there. For me, I having been around for many years and seen things go up and go down, this has been a year of really major cybersecurity impacts. I was just reading this morning as we're recording this some of the commentary all around why growth hadn't been very good in the last few months, and Jaguar Land Rover was mentioned as one of the reasons for UK growth being down. And I thought, when do you have a cyber attack actually being referenced as having an impact on nationwide growth? That's quite dramatic, and the numbers involved in these cyber attacks was absolutely massive. And you know that organizations that have been hit by these big problems will have invested now and will have put a huge amount of change in place, but that will have also have knocked all of their change programs sideways whilst they try and deal with that. And also what we should be seeing is that organizations who haven't had any challenges in cyber areas in the last year should definitely be not they shouldn't be sitting back thinking we've got it sorted, we've got our cyber essentials plus, we don't have anything to worry about. They should be actually thinking, okay, if it wasn't this year, it could be next year. What can we do to try and make it so as if there is something happens, the impact is as low as possible? And that's really one of the things I've learned from this. Throughout my time as a CIO, I was always aware that a cyber attack could happen, but the challenge was to try and reduce the impact of that cyber attack if it did happen, to deal with it quickly, to try and make sure that the organization was able to recover quickly. Just as with any business continuity incident, you understand, I know there might be a fire in a building, but if you're able to react quickly by moving staff to a serviced office or something like that, then you're going to have a much better outcome than if you're just completely floored by it and you can't move on. So lots of things going on, lots of things on the agenda. We talked about the shrinking of teams and the sector. We talked about cyber attacks. We talked about all of the regulation, some of the things going on around data as well. And we talked about the changing landscape in terms of people donating money to charities as well. So there's a lot in there. But I've seen even more things as well. I would say some other things I've seen going on. We did a great podcast in the summer around CRMs, and that's been a world that's been going on for many, many years, CRM. But I've seen that the landscape around CRM is changing. That we did have some really, really big investments in big CRMs. And I've just seen, I wouldn't say it's completely changed to something completely different, but I've noticed a sense of, I've noticed things are starting to move in that area, that we're looking at different ways that we can actually understand our customers and that we can actually try and keep their data held in ways that we can actually do all sorts of interesting things. And again, as always, AI is influencing that. And the other area I just wanted to mention is, have you seen much going on the sustainability agenda in the last year?
I mean, look, I'd qualify that as not enough is perhaps what should be happening. In fact, if anything, that's possibly one agenda that's been crowded out by all of those other things. In my own personal reflection on that, and that's a real shame. And actually, and I think about sustainability in its broadest sense. It's not just about the environment, but I take the kind of the UN and Sustainable Development Goals definitions of what that will mean in terms of equality. It could even mean things around sort of cybersecurity and the social justice elements of it. And I think the sort of rise of ESG, or the ESG agenda over the last few years has been smoothed out, I would say, and argue over the course of this year. Obviously, there's a COP we've just had that Again, sort of different calls are being made, but I think it's really hard. What I have seen is sort of small shoots of encouragement in the technology sector, and particularly in relation to AI and the conversation around data center efficiency and usage. I've seen some small tactical things where, organizations that are trying to build data centers responsibly in sort of recycling kind of swimming pools in the UK and using data centers, being really thoughtful around the cooling systems that they use around that and the use of renewables. But yeah, we've got a long way to go on this agenda.
Yeah, I do wonder whether we've stepped forward or stepped back this year on that agenda. So that's a whole load of things that have gone on. But I guess before I close out on what's happened in the last year, it's kind of useful to take a step back. We've listed a whole load of stuff that's gone on, and we've thought about what that meant in terms of the charity, what that meant in terms of the tech. But actually, what has there been the result of all of that stuff? Have we seen 2025 as a year when, in terms of the use of technology within charities, we've taken a step forward, we stayed the same, we've taken a step back? Have we moved ahead, do you think?
I think over the course of this year, and I'm going to talk about digital transformation here, right? Those horribly often use words that mean lots and lots of different things, which I actually saw something the other day where someone saying we shouldn't call it digital transformation, we should call it just an improvement plan. That's all it is. What we're doing is just a smorgasbord of lots of improvements and initiatives brought together under a grandstanding title called digital transformation. My reflection is this, that we were in version 1.0 of digital transformation. There was bits and pieces going on, and then there was a sudden acceleration, largely due to COVID, I would argue, and what happened in 2020. And I've actually been doing quite a lot of research on organizations and their digital transformation strategies, particularly around, I don't know, let's say like UN agencies or other things. And the thing that I've noticed is a lot of organizations have got a digital transformation strategy that almost went 2020 to 2025, very or pseudo Maoist 5 year plans that seem to be right. So, what I'm noticing is that a lot of organizations are probably finding that they're at a point where they're at that refresh moment on that digital transformation strategy, right? They're coming to the end of that first stage or first cycle of what they were going to do. And actually, we're moving into a digital transformation version 2.0, which is this AI fueled, if you're really going out there, kind of quantum computing, the sustainability, digital sustainability agenda. There's a new version of this digital change that we're going to do. So we're at a transition point, in my humble opinion. And I think that it may be we need to be thinking about it in the technology world of we did our bit. We got folks through COVID. We've got people now. We got a different seat at the table, and we've advanced our agenda to a particular stage. But we're now moving into the next bit, and I know it's forever like that. It must feel exhausting, actually, as CIOs and CTOs or technology leaders, or even just technology practitioners. But yeah, we are moving into another phase, and we've just got to get fit and get ready for that.
I think that's a good place to pause. I'm just going to summarize what I've heard there, but it's a good place to pause because we're saying we've reached the end of digital transformation 1.0 and we're looking to 2.0, and I've definitely seen that around the strategies. I'm going to take the positive spin on this. I've seen a lot happening in this year and in the last year or two, and I've seen organisations have coped with a lot of change that we've seen, all those different things we've seen happening. But the result has been that we have actually seen some really good pilots all around how AI can be used, but we've also seen lots of good transformation projects coming to fruition where things have gone in. We've seen charities changing and adapting, and uh, we've seen something that's become really embedded, which I've just actually, this is a brief side one we didn't mention in our things that we've seen in 2025. I've seen the roles and the team structures really embedding and gaining some maturity there. The words like DDAT functions and CDIOs, well, those are now mainstream. There's no longer, or there shouldn't be a question, I think, about how do digital data and transformation and technology and AI all fit together. I think that's now we've seen good examples of how that works, and we've seen that that can work well, and that there is actually a really good organizational competency around that, and that's that overall capability. And so having your teams working in a coordinated way has been a really good step forward. So I think what I'm saying is, if I was doing one of my traditional maturity models, which people would be bored to death of, anyone who knows me, where you see organizations moving up that scale, I've definitely seen the organizations that I've talked to and worked with. I've seen that change. So they've moved up and they've got some real maturity around how they treat digital and data and technology, and what the interaction with transformation is, and what their approaches to change are, how they keep the organization running on a day-to-day basis, but also how they actually deliver that transformation. All of that stuff now has become mainstreamed, has been a real good success point, and you're nodding along with me there. So we're feeling a pretty good positive spin. It's been a difficult year, but actually we've seen real progress, and we've moved forward, and we've locked in some really good change within the sector. So that was a summary of all of the things that we think were important in 2025. And join us for the next part, which is going to be all around what we look forward to in 2026.
Thanks, Stuart. Thanks, folks.
You've been listening to an episode of Virtue and Virtuosity, brought to you by VirtueChain, the AI consultancy for the charity and not-for-profit sector. Did you know that there is also a newsletter that goes with this podcast, containing news on AI and tech in the charity sector, alongside a podcast summary? You can check out previous copies and subscribe through the link on the VirtueChain website at virtuechain.co.uk, or through LinkedIn. Check out the profile of Stuart Miskilling, that's me, for the subscribe button to the newsletter.